He fired me in front of everyone on my birthday. The office went silent, balloons still hanging from my desk, the cake half cut, my name written in blue frosting, already melting under the lights. And there he was, Richard, the man everyone feared, the man who thought rules were written to protect him, not the people under him. He looked at me like I was a stain he wanted gone. "You violated company policy," he said, his voice sharp enough to slice through the room. My coworkers avoided my eyes. No one spoke, not even Anna, the one who'd spent years calling me her mentor. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just smiled, because the policy he was using to destroy me, it was the one I wrote. Well, not exactly me. My lawyer did. Every word, every clause, every line, signed under his name, of course. But I was the ghostwriter behind it, and now he was about to choke on his own words. He thought I'd break. He thought I'd walk out humiliated, forgotten. He had no idea that this was the day he was getting fired. He just didn't know it yet. The security guard came over, holding a box for my things. I placed my ID inside, then looked Richard straight in the eye. "Happy Policy Enforcement Day," I said softly. He didn't understand what I meant. Not yet. As I walked toward the elevator, the office whispers followed me. Pity, confusion, relief that it wasn't them. I pressed the button, and as the doors closed, I whispered to myself, "And what happened next will make you rethink every rule you ever signed at work." Because the last thing I did before walking out, that's what ruined him. And trust me, the ending will shock you. They called it Titan Corp, a billion-dollar tech empire built on numbers, not people. Everything inside that glass tower ran on rules. Rules for emails, rules for meetings, rules for how long you could breathe before the next deadline. It wasn't a company. It was a machine, and I was the one who wrote its code of conduct. My job? Compliance officer. My role was to make sure everyone followed the rules. Ironically, that meant I knew every single loophole better than anyone else. I didn't create laws to protect power. I created them to protect fairness. But fairness doesn't last long when a man like Richard takes the throne. Richard Langston, the new CEO, he walked into the company like he owned the air we breathed. Expensive suit, colder eyes, the kind of man who smiled only when someone else was trembling. He fired 3 executives in his first week, just to make a point. The rest of us got the message. You're next, unless you worship him. At first, we kept it professional. He asked questions. I gave facts. He wanted obedience. I gave him truth. That's what he hated most. He once said to me, "You hide behind policies like a coward." I smiled and replied, "No, Richard, I built them." From that day, he made me his quiet enemy. Weeks later, he summoned me into his glass office. No greeting, no chair offered. He leaned forward and said, "Rewrite every policy in this company. I want full control. No loopholes, no exceptions." I nodded, calm, measured, because while he saw control, I saw opportunity. What he didn't know was that I never wrote a policy alone. I had a friend, an attorney who'd helped me structure every word to be legally bulletproof. Together, we could turn a single sentence into a weapon. So when Richard demanded total power, I gave it to him. On paper. Every clause he approved, every signature he stamped, pulled the trigger on his own downfall. And the final line of that document, the one he didn't even read, would become the knife that slit his career wide open. Stay with me. Because when he fired me for breaking policy, he never realized the policy was his execution order. It started with a whisper, the kind that slithers through office walls before anyone dares to say it out loud. They're cutting people. Middle management first. Richard wants blood. And then the emails began. Performance evaluations, cost restructuring, redundancy assessments. All code for the same thing. Layoffs. He was cleaning house, one department at a time. But he wasn't just firing people. He was sending messages. Fear kept the place running smoother than any system ever could. Still, every tyrant needs a sacrifice. And for Richard, that was me. The accusation hit like a gunshot. A confidential email had been sent to a client. From my account. Sensitive information, they said. I knew the email. I recognized the words. But they'd been cut, edited, twisted. Someone had taken my message and turned it into a crime. No warning, no hearing. Just a meeting invite at 3 p.m. Mandatory compliance review. I walked into the boardroom. Richard was there, sitting at the head of the table like a king waiting for an execution to begin. HR sat beside him, eyes glued to the papers in front of her, too scared to look at me. He didn't waste a second. You broke company policy, he said. You're done. No evidence. No discussion. Just a verdict. He slid the termination papers across the table, his smile razor thin. The same man who told me to rewrite the policies was now hiding behind one of them like a coward. I glanced at the line of text printed at the bottom of the page. Termination under Section 12 of Corporate Conduct Policy. The irony almost made me laugh. I picked up the pen, signed, and then looked him dead in the eye. Thank you for enforcing my work, I said quietly. He frowned, not understanding. To him, my calm was fear, my silence, defeat. But what he didn't realize, in that exact moment, was that he had just signed his own death warrant. The HR director handed me an empty box for my things, eyes full of pity. Richard leaned back, smug, already thinking about who he'd fire next. As I walked toward the door, I paused. The room was heavy with arrogance and ignorance, the perfect mix for destruction. And the last thing you'll ever remember, I said, turning back to him, is how good it felt to think you'd won. Because what came after this meeting would make everyone in that company rethink what breaking policy really meant. And the ending, I promise, will leave you speechless. They say silence is golden, but when you're walking through an office filled with whispers about you, silence feels like a knife twisting in your chest. The moment I stepped out of that conference room, I could feel the stares. Every screen flickered back to life, but eyes followed me instead of the numbers on their monitors. Someone muttered, he must have leaked something. Another whispered, didn't think he'd go down like that. I didn't defend myself. What was the point? In a place built on policies, once you're labeled guilty, truth doesn't matter. Paperwork does. By the time I reached my desk, my access badge had already stopped working. Emails gone, files wiped, years of work erased like I'd never existed. I walked out carrying a box of my things, a mug, a photo of my team, the pen I used to sign the company's first compliance policy. The irony burned. Outside, the wind hit harder than I expected. My phone buzzed. Messages from coworkers, short and cautious. I'm so sorry. Take care. I can't talk about it right now. Then the silence stretched into days. Friends stopped calling. Recruiters ghosted me. My parents asked if I'd done something illegal. Even my sister looked at me differently. I went from respected to radioactive overnight. I tried to let it go, maybe start over somewhere smaller, quieter. But at night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Richard smirk when he said, "You're done." Then, one evening, as I sat in the dark with my laptop open to a half-written resignation letter from life itself, my phone lit up. A single message. From a name I hadn't seen in months. Eleanor, my old lawyer. 3 words. Check Section 12. My heart pounded. I dug through my archived files until I found it. Company Policy, Revision 4.3. There it was, buried in the legal dust. Termination clauses shall not be valid if the accused employee participated in the policy's authorship. I froze, read it again and again. He'd fired me for breaking a rule that made his action invalid. Richard didn't just fire me. He violated the very system he thought protected him. And at that moment, I realized I wasn't ruined. He was. He just didn't know it yet. And what I did next will make you question every signature you've ever put on a contract. The night I found Section 12, I didn't sleep. I just sat there, staring at the screen, the words glowing back at me like a loaded gun I'd forgotten I owned. He fired me under a clause that nullified itself. I picked up the phone and called Eleanor. She answered on the first ring. "You remember that line?" I asked. Her voice was calm, surgical. "Yes, it's enforceable by state law." That sentence alone flipped the world back into motion. The plan didn't start with rage. It started with silence. I didn't rush to defend myself. I didn't call the press or post some emotional rant online. I let Richard feel safe, let him brag. Within days, rumors spread through Titan Corp that I was under investigation, that I'd violated confidentiality. He made sure everyone knew I was the villain. Perfect. Because while he was celebrating his public execution of me, I was preparing his private one. Step 1, evidence. I gathered the original draft of the company policy, every tracked change, every timestamp, every email where Richard approved each edit without reading it. The metadata was crystal clear. I was the co-author. Step 2, the formal complaint. I drafted it under my lawyer's guidance and sent it directly to Titan Corp's audit committee and corporate legal affairs at the parent company. No drama, just facts, just the kind of paper that makes billion-dollar boards lose sleep. Attached were 2 files. One, the signed termination order. The other, the version of the policy proving the firing violated internal law. And by state regulation, any termination that breaches a company's own policy is automatically void and punishable by 5 times the employee's contractual salary. That meant Richard hadn't just broken the rules. He'd committed a multi-million-dollar violation. But here's where it gets beautiful. I knew he was preparing for Titan Corp's IPO. And in every IPO filing, there's one fatal sentence that must stay true. There are no pending legal disputes. So I waited until the exact day their final prospectus was due. Then, at 8:03 a.m., I hit send. A formal claim for wrongful termination, filed with supporting evidence and demand for compensation. The amount? $2 million. Now he had 2 choices. Settle quietly and pay me before the board discovered his mistake. Or fight it and risk delaying the IPO 6 months, maybe longer. Every minute the complaint existed, every email stamped with my name, was a countdown clock ticking inside his empire. And the best part? He still had no idea the bullet in his chest was the same policy he'd ordered me to create. He thought I was gone. He thought I was beaten. But the truth? I wasn't his victim anymore. I was his claws. And the next thing I did would make him wish he'd never learned my name. He tried to bury it. He thought money, lawyers, and silence could kill the truth. But once a bullet leaves the chamber, you can't call it back. Richard hired one of the top legal firms in New York to fight my claim. He thought a few high-priced attorneys could rewrite reality. They tried to scare me with long letters, corporate jargon, and threats of counteraction. I didn't flinch, because every document, every timestamp, every policy version had already been verified, notarized, and filed. My case wasn't a complaint anymore. It was evidence, sealed and unstoppable. So I made my next move. I filed the lawsuit publicly under the Human Rights and Employment Protection Act. I didn't want it quiet. I wanted it loud. The case name read Langston v. Titan Corp. Wrongful termination under policy violation. The second the document hit the court's public database, everything changed. Whispers turned into headlines. Emails turned into panic. By noon, half the company had heard. By evening, it was all over the intranet. Titan Corp employees started questioning everything: their contracts, their safety, their loyalty. The company's Slack exploded with messages like, "Wait, if he's right, are our policies even legal?" The boardroom turned into a war zone. Investors demanded answers. The stock price dropped 6% overnight, then 9%, then 12%. Richard tried to keep calm, but pressure has a way of breaking people who live on control. At 2:14 a.m., I received an email from him. "You'll regret this." I stared at it for a moment, then smiled, and typed one line: "Section 12 says otherwise." 3 days later, Titan Corp's parent company contacted me through their legal counsel. Their tone was polite, too polite. "We've reviewed your claim. Mr. Langston's actions were unauthorized. You are to be reinstated with full compensation, effective immediately." That's corporate language for, "We're firing the CEO." Richard was gone. Just like that. No farewell, no speech, no warning. One day he was at the top of the tower. The next, his name was scrubbed from the directory like he never existed. But I wasn't done. I returned to the office not to celebrate, not to reclaim my desk, but to activate the final clause, the one he never saw. Clause 14.7. If the policy creator is wrongfully terminated, all contracts signed under said policy are rendered void until reinstatement. In other words, every deal Richard made while I was fired, every contract, every partnership, every IPO filing, turned into meaningless paper. By 9:00 a.m., legal teams were shredding documents faster than they could print them. By noon, the IPO collapsed. Investors pulled out. The company lost $80 million in market value. And Richard? He lost everything. His title, his money, his reputation. He wanted control. He got chaos. He fired me for breaking policy. But in the end, it was his policy that broke him. And what happened next will make even the cruelest boss think twice before playing God. They thought I'd come back. They thought I'd sit quietly at the same desk, shake hands, and pretend nothing happened. But power tastes different once you've taken it back. And I wasn't about to waste it. The board offered me my position again. Senior Compliance Director, same title, same office, same cold walls. I smiled, thanked them, and declined. I had other plans. 3 weeks later, I walked into a new building, smaller, humbler, alive. The company Richard used to mock in meetings. He called them the small fish that won't survive the market. They were called Novatech, and their CEO knew exactly who I was. The first day, they invited me to their quarterly town hall, live streamed for investors, partners, and employees worldwide. The auditorium buzzed with energy, a sea of faces eager for change. The CEO stepped onto the stage, microphone in hand, and smiled. "Today," he said, "we welcome someone very special. The man who wrote the policy that destroyed Titan Corp." The audience went silent for half a second, then erupted in applause. Cameras flashed, laughter echoed. My name trended online within minutes. Somewhere across the city, in a dark apartment, Richard was watching the live stream. His glass of whiskey froze midair, his face drained of color. He finally understood. The thing he'd mocked, the rule he'd weaponized, the document he thought made him untouchable, had become the very sword that buried his empire. Policy, I realized, is like fire. It can warm your house, or it can burn it to the ground. And Richard learned the truth too late, watching his kingdom crumble, built on a rule he never really read. And the next chapter will make you wonder who's writing your rules. He thought power was control. Barking orders, signing papers, firing people. But real power isn't about control. It's about understanding the rules better than the man who made them. He fired me for breaking policy. But that policy, it was mine. Every word, Every line, every loophole, written by the hand he tried to crush. In the end, he lost everything, and I didn't lift a finger. I just let his arrogance pull the trigger. Because revenge isn't loud, it's quiet, calculated, and signed in ink he never bothered to read.